On Tuesday, January 31st, 2023, an Iowa House subcommittee advanced House Study Bill 114, which seeks to place a $1 million cap on non-economic damages against a trucking company in civil cases involving personal injury or death. Welcome to the Biker Rebellion. I'm your host, Ginger, here with founding member of the Biker Lawyers, Pete Leahy. Pete, what are the categories of non-economic damages that this bill affects?
When you hear the term non-economic damages, be thinking quality of life, because that's exactly what it is. Non-economic damages are things like pain and suffering. It's disability that a person suffers because of a crash. It can be loss of consortium of their loved ones, whether it be temporary or long-term or even permanent. So it's all the things that affect what most people would consider quality of life.
Okay. So the Iowa Motor Truck Association lobbyist, David Scott, he stated that this bill will bring fairness to nuclear verdicts around the country. What did he mean by this? Taking note that he said around the country, even though this bill is clearly just for Iowa, so we're already off to a rocky start on clarity.
What he means by this is he thinks he's smarter than you, and he thinks that he can manipulate you by referring to nuclear verdicts. I promise you that this Motor Truckers Association or whatever it is, I promise you, they focus grouped this and they came up with loaded language that they found people will react to. And people hear the phrase nuclear verdicts and they think, oh my God, there are these terrible, crazy, unfair verdicts going around. And in reality, every time you hear the term nuclear verdict, pass it through your mind. This person is trying to manipulate me to get what he wants.
Those who are pushing this proposed legislation, they say it's needed because people who get involved in crashes with commercial trucks start seeing dollar signs. What do you think of that?
Again, it's manipulation. Let me tell you what people involved in crashes with commercial motor vehicles start seeing. They start seeing doctors. They start seeing hospitals. They start seeing physical therapists. Their life is going to be dominated by medical care. The last thing these people are seeing is dollar signs. This is simply the trucking industry trying to manipulate average people like all of us into thinking that something like this is necessary, when in fact, it's not. I mean, you referred to before how they talked about it bringing fairness to verdicts around the country, and the point you made was excellent, and that is, why are we talking about around the country? We need to talk about Iowa. Tell me about nuclear verdicts in Iowa. Show me one.
Right.
It's pure manipulation. And if somebody wants to refer to nuclear verdicts and they can come up with a number of what might be considered a big verdict, don't just tell me the number. Tell me about the human suffering that was represented by that verdict and why it happened.
I guess it would be fair to say that if we're talking about people seeing dollar signs, to a degree, you're right. They're going to see those dollar signs in the hospital bills they have to pay. That's where those dollar signs are, is how much money they have to pay to get to a recovery point.
Think about the hypocrisy. The trucking industry wants you to believe that people are seeing dollar signs when they get involved in a crash. Who's really seeing dollar signs?
Probably.
It's the trucking industry that's seeing dollar signs because they want to artificially limit how much horrifically injured Iowans can receive for the injuries because of what happened with the trucking company.
This bill, it protects these trucking employers. Does it protect their employees?
No, it doesn't do shit for their employees. This just protects the big boys.
Could it potentially push that liability towards the employees? Does it affect that at all?
Well, let's put it this way. One part of this bill also involves not being able to sue a trucking company for bad hiring practices. What does that mean? What it means is if a trucking company hires somebody who they know to have drug problems, and that person then, under the influence, causes some horrific crash, you can't sue the trucking company for their decision to hire this person with a known drug problem. So now the person with the drug problem is, in essence, kind of on their own.
Except they probably don't have any money because they've got a drug problem.
Well, exactly.
Fair. How often have you seen a nuclear verdict? You've been practicing law for almost 4 decades. How often have you seen the quote-unquote nuclear verdict that they're talking about?
Never.
So this is just hypothetical.
Literally never. This is the people who want this legislation trying to scare Iowans into thinking that it's needed, including some of the trucking companies. I mean, I know there are a lot of trucking companies out there that are well-intentioned, but they're trying to scare them into complying with what they want as well. But it just doesn't happen. And if a larger verdict happens, let me tell you why it happens. It's because a jury of Iowans sat and heard the evidence. They looked into the eyes of the people who were affected by the crash, and they determined that it was the right thing to do. So my question is, who the hell is the state legislature to substitute their judgment for that jury who looks at the person and the family that's affected by the crash? Who are they to substitute their judgment for that jury?
It's a fair point. This one also is a bit of a question that I think the audience would do well to really take to heart. Do we need safeguards against the size of verdicts to protect trucking companies? And how does this affect Iowan families who have the misfortune of being involved in a crash with a commercial truck?
Let's jump right back into the main safeguard. The main safeguard is Iowa juries. You try one of these cases and you're going to have 8 Iowans sitting on that jury panel. I don't know Iowans sitting on juries to be doing crazy things like they want you to believe. But the main safeguard is the jury system. I mean, think about it. Should we have this totally arbitrary limit on how much a family can recover if they're horrifically injured to protect the trucking industry? Or should we have the safeguard of a jury? Because guess who else needs to be safeguarded? The families.
Right.
Let's let juries do that balancing act between safeguarding and protecting a family and making it right for them versus the trucking company who really doesn't have much, if any, need for safeguards.
And I suppose it would be also fair to say in this that I mean, I remember being in law school, going to a torts class, and torts is part of what covers personal injury. That's the official legal category for it, if I remember correctly. And the professor talked to me a little bit about personal injury and said Iowa's one of the few places that he doesn't ever want to practice personal injury because there's, on most juries, it's a very conservative slant compared to a lot of other states. And the verdicts tend to be lower than other states in his experience back when he was practicing before he, did the whole professor gig. And it was because, as he put it, you have, for every injured person, usually there's somebody who, maybe they were in a farming accident and they never recovered any money because that's just the way it was when they were growing up. But there's already more of a conservative slant, and this seeks to limit that further, from what I understand.
Yeah, it does. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you get a big verdict in Iowa, you damn well deserved it, because it is really, really difficult to get an Iowa jury to enter what most people would consider a big verdict. You've got, I sincerely believe this, that when you walk into a courtroom representing somebody who's asking for money, the jury sits there and looks at them and thinks, even if this person does deserve money, how can we keep this under control? Because we don't want it to be one of these big jury verdicts that we keep hearing about. People are hardwired against big verdicts in the first place. So if you see a big verdict in Iowa, it was damn well deserved.
I remember growing up, there was that McDonald's case that everybody always talks about, everybody references, and I swear that case has done more damage to people recovering the appropriate sum of money than it ever did good, in a way, because everybody looks at that McDonald's case and like, spilled a cup of coffee. How did they get all this money? And I remember looking at the details of that case, and once I looked at it, I'm like, oh, that's how they got all that money. There were horrific burns. But the point is, it's a conservative slant because of some of these things that have been pushed heavily by lobbyists, by insurance companies over the years to position themselves in a way that makes it look like they shouldn't have to pay out all this money because people are just trying to grab. They're just trying to nickel and dime everybody to death and grab all that sweet free money instead of saying it appropriately. These people are injured, they're hurt, they need to recover, that costs money. What does this bill take away in terms of rights?
It takes away the rights, the ability of people who are horrifically injured to receive anything even remotely approaching fair compensation for what they've lost.
And how do we fight this bill?
We fight this bill by contacting our legislators, by telling them how crappy of a bill we think this is, how we don't like the fact that the legislature is talking about taking away even more of our rights, and telling our legislators, we trust Iowa juries. We do not need to sell our soul to the trucking industry to give them this kind of limitation on liability that they seem to think they need.
This trucking company liability bill has been bouncing around the legislative body of Iowa for the past 2 years, for reference. It has not passed on either of the prior two attempts, one of which involved trying to attach it to completely unrelated legislation. But this time it could become law, which would endanger the rights of Iowans statewide. Contact your representative at the number below, and remember, speak truth to power. Brought to you by the Biker Lawyers. Injured? Ride with us.